با ما امشب هم خوش آمدین. مهمان امشب برنامه ما آقای داگلاس کی، رئیس برنامه‌های انکشافی ملل متحد در افغانستان. در گفتگوی امشب هم روی موارد مختلف از آدرس UNDP یا برنامه انکشاف ملل متحد در افغانستان بحث خواهد کردیم. روی اولویت‌های نهاد برای افغانستان و همچنان روی پروژه‌های مقطعی و پروژه‌های درازمدت و پروژه‌های پایدار برای افغانستان. Welcome, Mr. Douglas, to this interview.
Thank you.
Let me start from here. How's your partnership with National Unity Government?
Oh, it's very strong. The way UNDP works is entirely on the basis of partnership. Partnership with the government, which is our main counterpart. We are here at the invitation and with the support of the government. It is the government that decides the priorities and asks us to help them meet those priorities. And I think just having arrived quite recently, I think it's a very good opportunity to open up a new chapter. I look forward, and I'm currently very actively meeting very senior level representatives of the government of Afghanistan to listen to them, to hear about their needs and their priorities, to ensure that UNDP's support to Afghanistan is in line with those priorities.
As you mentioned that you recently came to Afghanistan, especially in Kabul. Let me have your vision. How do you find this partnership between the UNDP and the government of Afghanistan? How do you find?
Well, I think the way UNDP works, we have country offices in 168 countries throughout the world. We are what we would call a development network. We don't have much financing of our own, but what we do have is experience, lessons learned, and best practices of what has worked in development in many other parts of the world. What our job here in Afghanistan, as in many other countries, is to ensure that those ideas and those best practices and those experiences are brought to Afghanistan and shown to the government of Afghanistan so that these lessons can be used to support the priorities of the government here. So it is entirely about that one word that you used. It's about partnership. We bring something that we hope can be of use to the government of Afghanistan, and the government hopefully benefits from the experiences, the technical support that we can bring to this country.
Let me know about the UNDP priorities for Afghanistan as well. As you mentioned before, that you listen for the government of Afghanistan regarding their essential and priorities. What are the UNDP priorities for Afghanistan?
Well, we're currently we have a number of projects that have been in place for a certain number of years. Some are newer, some are more recent, some are older. But right now we're at a very important point in time in view of the President's priorities for the countries that he has set very clearly. It's a very important time for UNDP itself to reevaluate how have we been implementing these projects, how can we sometimes adjust and ensure that they are fully in line with what this country wants and needs from us. So based on that evaluation and that process of adjustment, we already see several areas that will be priorities for us moving forward. Those will be first and foremost in the rule of law area. Where there is no security, development is very difficult to bring about. So again, one of our top priorities is supporting the government in establishing what we call rule of law, where the individual people can feel safe and secure with very supportive police in their communities that can help bring about security to their lives so that they can experience the process of development. Governance, that's another broad key area, supporting the national government here, as well as supporting the provincial governments in providing the policies and supporting the people based on experiences that have happened in other parts of the world. So, rule of law is one, governance is another one. Another top priority for us, gender, women's empowerment. What we have found throughout the world is that when women are discriminated against, when women are not able to enjoy full rights, equal rights that men have, then a huge part of one country's population will not have a chance to contribute to economic growth and development. So another priority here is to help the government, help the authorities, and help the people of Afghanistan to ensure that women enjoy equal and full rights.
Okay. If I don't got your explanation, one of the gist point and one of the bullet point for your priorities, evaluation of your own organization. Am I right?
Yes.
It's one of the bullet point of your priorities for Afghanistan.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Another question regarding the priorities. Is there any changes between the, regarding your priorities between the present and the past? I mean the ex-regime. Is
Yes,
there any changes?
There is. There is one very clear difference that will characterize all of our programs, and not only the ones that I've mentioned already, but other ones like environmental support, sustainability, livelihoods, economic lives of the people, health. These are three of the other programs that I wasn't able to...
These are not the part of the previous project in here?
No, these are separate. There's about 6 broad areas which I've just mentioned now. Rule of law, governance, gender, livelihoods, environment, and health. Those are the 6 defining programs for UNDP as we move forward. But to answer your question, the major change that we have now with President Ghani and the government of unity is that we have a much stronger focus on capacity building. It is something that UNDP should have been doing from when we first arrived many years ago, but it's certainly something that we will be focusing on as a top priority as we move forward. You know this old expression, give a man a fish and he will eat for one day, but teach a man to fish and he will eat for the rest of his life. That is the transition that we must make as UNDP.
So you just teach us, or you just
we
eat?
Call it capacity building. And again, it's similar to what I was mentioning before. What are some of the lessons learned in other parts of the world to bring about a positive change in the lives of people? These are not very easy lessons. These are sometimes very complicated, and that's why we call it technical assistance, either through training, new ideas, and sometimes financial support as well is needed. And it's that combination between what a country's people want and need, what a government can provide in terms of policy, guidance, and leadership, and what UNDP can bring in terms of knowledge and experience. And again, it's on that basis that we can help primarily the government, the authorities here, to help the lives of its people more effectively.
So, generally we accept that you have some new thing for the government of Afghanistan.
Yes.
And you accept that there are some changes regarding your project.
Absolutely.
Let me know regarding one of the unique elements that you do now, not in previous and past.
Well, again, one big change that we are going to be moving into, so far for the last few years, we've had several big projects, okay? Well, gender is a good example, okay? Our work in supporting the rights of women in Afghanistan, we will now go through a big change within UNDP also. Because currently we have, for example, in one of our economic livelihoods projects, how we can help women start new businesses. In another one of our big projects, LOTFA, you must have heard of that one, it's how we can help women get more involved in the police force through training and exposure. We now in UNDP need to bring within UNDP these projects together. So out in the provinces, not only in the capital, but also in the provinces, we are helping women both have a better life through businesses of their own, and women who can actually be police officials to help and to understand the needs of women, which are very different in terms of violence against women and the immediate security needs of women, which are very different from men. It's much easier for a woman to go to a female police official and report those needs than it is to a male official. And again, if we can, UNDP, bring those projects together, we will be able to support the government and the country much more effectively.
Thank you very much. We'll come to the LOTFA project later. Let me have my recent question in this part as well. UNDP is a supporter of development. Which kind of development and how?
Well, I always say, if I was in a room of 10 people and I asked, what is development? I think I would get 10 answers. So in my 22 years in the system, thinking about this question, I bring it down to one word: choices. development is about choices, giving people more choices in how they live their lives, how they can fulfill the potential, the natural born human right to be everything that you can be. When people don't have choices, they cannot fulfill that potential, what they were put on this earth to do. That's what development is about. And in all of our programs that I mentioned earlier, all 6 major programs, it's about increasing the range of choices that people have to realize their potential.
You just you have a definition regarding the development by one word. Do you accept this one, that your definition is fixed with the condition in Afghanistan, that development is something like choices?
Well, again, in order to have those choices, you have to have many things in place. Otherwise, it's just the fish. We're not about just giving that one fish for that day. You know, there's a museum that I like in my home country, and when you walk into that museum, there's a giant glass ball. Okay, it's a clear, transparent glass sphere, and inside that glass sphere, there's some water, there's some fish, and there's some plants. But the beautiful thing about this glass ball is that you never have to open it. You don't have to feed those fish. You don't have to give them more water. It's perfect balance from the sunlight that creates, that allows the plants to grow, that consumes the oxygen that the fish are giving. The fish can eat off the plants. The plants live off the waste from the fish. That's what development is, if it is to be what we call sustainable. This has to be the perfect balance of what a people need, what they want to do with their lives, what they can do. For example, the land, can it provide the agricultural needs? Can it meet the needs of those people? Does the government provide the leadership and the enabling environment, the environment for the people to also work? Is the business climate right? You have to have all those pieces in place, and that's what UNDP is about. We need to look at these situations very carefully and support the government in how we can bring about this situation of perfect balance. And it's very difficult to do, very difficult.
Thank you very much. ادامه این گفتگو تا لحظات بعد. دوباره خوش آمدید. Mr. Douglas, President Ghani criticized Lutfa project and he accused the management of this project. Especially why President was not happy particularly from this project, and also he accused ex-leadership for misleadershiping of this project. Do you accept this one?
I do. I think there were big changes that we have now brought about in this project. And I think the one weakness of what we were doing in this country is precisely what President Ghani identified. We weren't doing enough to support the government in building the capacity to support the police of Afghanistan. It's not the job of UNDP to directly be doing that over long periods of time, providing financing for the salaries. That's not our job. That's not our role. As I mentioned earlier, our role is one to support the building of the capacity of the government to manage its police, to pay its police. And it's precisely for that reason, in the last 6 months, there's been a massive turnaround in how we do this project. And again, on the 1st of July, with the Minister of Interior and with the support of the government, it was a very momentous milestone where we signed the next 18-month project. And I think the strong focus on capacity building meets the expectations of the President. Now it will be up to us to make sure that we meet those objectives and those commitments that we have made. And it's also a much stronger role of oversight, how the financing and the money, which is not ours, this is donor money, other governments that channel the money through UNDP. Like I said earlier, UNDP doesn't have funds, significant funds of its own. We act as the channel through which the international community...
You mean you're acting like a facilitator?
A facilitator, that's right. We act as a facilitator to ensure to our donors that the finances that they provide to us in support of the government of Afghanistan will be used properly.
So entirely you just accept the mismanagement with ex-leadership in UNDP?
I'm not sure, you know, mismanagement would be the right word. I'm saying that we could have and should have done things a little bit differently. And I think the President zoomed precisely on where we should have been doing what UNDP normally does. In most countries of the world,
Mr.
we
Douglas,
are all about
let me have
capacity
interfere.
building.
If it's not a mismanagement with the ex-leadership, and you mentioned that the payment is not your responsibility. You're a facilitator and a channel, that you're operating the projects. Why the ex-leadership just accepting this one, that they should pay for the police of Afghanistan?
Well,
so
again,
it's a mismanagement or not?
I think you introduced our discussion today with a focus on partnership. It's a partnership and a dialogue that needs to identify what the government does on the one hand and what UNDP does on the other. The immediate needs of that chapter in our partnership were such that the project was needed to be done in that way. But now we are in a different time, we're in a different moment right now. The needs that have been identified by the government are clearly different. And in my personal view, I think these are the right priorities now.
Mr. Douglas, why I have this question? Because we must point out some problem regarding the project which is funded through the several donors through the UNDP in Afghanistan. Why I have this question? Because I want to have the new decision of the new leadership and the new solution for this one.
Yeah.
The problem that I've already been pointed out by the government of Afghanistan. Because of this, I have this question.
Sure, and again, I want to reiterate the solution. It's all about capacity building. The more that we can support the Ministry of Interior to build the capacity of its police according to human rights, gender, and community needs, and the sooner that we can support the Ministry of Interior to provide the payroll on its own without any involvement of UNDP, the better. The sooner, the better. And that's UNDP's principal function throughout the world, and certainly moving forward, it's our principal priority of what we're going to be doing in Afghanistan.
Okay, Mr. Douglas, if we submit everything to the Interior Ministry, for example, the payroll and the payment of the salaries for the policies, do you responsible for the evaluation of the project or not?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, the responsibility comes in several parts. The government has its responsibility, and we have ours. Clearly, the fact that the President himself has made such a clear pronouncement repeatedly on the need to reduce corruption in this government is a very positive sign for UNDP and the entire donor community that this is a very, very good move forward.
But
so therefore, what we have been doing, the way this project has been reformulated, is a much stronger focus on supporting the government in identifying those vulnerabilities, those risks. For example, we will be working very closely with the Director General in the Ministry of Interior. We will be working with the donor community and the ministry to develop more electronic database systems that identify who's in the police force and when do they need to get paid and how much. No longer paper. Sign here, bring there. Electronic systems are much more difficult to manipulate.
Okay, you mean that every section have their own responsibilities?
That's right.
So let me have your vision that what's the mechanism for the evaluation of this project between UNDP and the government of Afghanistan. For example, when you just discussing regarding the Lutfa, what's the mechanism for evaluation of this project? It's belong to you, government, or Minister of Interior?
As I mentioned earlier, it's a shared responsibility. But what we have done with the full leadership of the government itself is to adapt more stringent controls. So, for example, we used to provide the financing for this project from the donors on a quarterly basis. And during that quarter, payments would be made by the government to the police as it saw necessary. Now, in full partnership with the government itself, this mechanism has been reduced to monthly. So now the payments go from us to the government on a monthly basis, which allow each month for all of the data and the information on where the money has gone, how much, to be reviewed on a monthly basis.
Thank
And this
you very
allows a
much.
much careful, more scrutiny that the government itself has said it wants. And again, this is a very good solution because it suggests a much stronger priority attached to transparency. How are we using this money?
Thank you, and this is the solution. One of the problem with the UNDP in Afghanistan is problem of security and administrative cost of UNDP in Afghanistan. Sometimes here is some report that the security and administrative cost of the UNDP is more than some project which they are implementing in Afghanistan in here. Do you accept this one?
I don't think that's an accurate or well-informed perspective, to be very honest. Globally, what we call the overhead, what money comes into our projects and what we must take to maintain our staffing costs, all the security requirements that we need, are much lower than what any other bilateral government could provide here. In fact, year after year, UNDP, this past year, for example, UNDP has won the award globally for aid providers in terms of transparency and aid efficiency. So it's something we're very proud of. But of course, in a situation like Afghanistan, one clear requirement which adds additional costs is there, and you know what it is. It's security. In many other countries, Tanzania, we don't need those security costs. Armored vehicles cost more. Armed guards cost more. So all these things do add up to create a little bit, well, significantly more cost than we would like to use.
In some cases, this cost is much more from the project that you will implement in here. Do you accept this one?
Well, again, for us to implement any project, we have to have the staff to implement those projects. We have to have the facilities. And all of those add up. Again, but what I want to emphasize is, you were saying, are these higher than other aid providers? No, it's actually one of the lowest and most efficient. And in fact, here in Afghanistan, we have actually reduced the standard level of cost that we usually have in other countries. It's usually 8% of our operating costs goes to covering our staffing and facilities and all that. Here, it's 4%. 4%. So we're actually going much further than we normally are to be careful with how much we spend on ourselves.
Thank you. How much you are accountable for the donors and how you make confident the donors that you are doing the project based on your intended purpose?
Our role is to be accountable to the donors for every single dollar or euro that they provide to us in any country that we operate in. And it's for that reason that when we are accepting any financing from a donor government, there is a very detailed process through work planning, monitoring, and evaluation on how the money was spent. It's only for that reason that UNDP today is the largest development agency of the entire UN system. It's because we have developed a reputation over the years to be a very transparent and accountable organization for how we use donor funding.
Thank you very much. As you know, the 13th to 16th of July is the third international conference on financing for development. My question is, what will be the impact of such summit for the countries like Afghanistan?
Well, you know, this is 2015. It's the final year of a 15-year project, which was called the Millennium Development Goals. Those Millennium Development Goals were very special because for the first time in the history of humanity, the international community agreed on quantitative goals of how to bring about a better life to the people of this world. 50% reduction in poverty, 50% increase in the number of girls who attend primary school. Very hard numbers. This is the final year. Moving forward for the next 15 years, we are now going to the next level of hope and ambition for what we can do as an international community together to bring about an improvement in people's lives. So we call these the Sustainable Development Goals. And the main difference with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, is that there's a much clearer recognition that our global environment is deteriorating. We all need to work together to save our planet. So what's happening in Addis today, tomorrow, and the next day, 3 days, is to identify how can we mobilize the financial needs to support what will necessarily be a global effort. In 20, 30 years, all of these conflicts, including the one in Afghanistan, hopefully it'll be long over by then, but all these conflicts will seem like little blips on the radar, because the major threat to our society, to our shared humanity, is climate change. And once the world starts heating up, as it will, all of these conflicts will seem like just a nuisance compared to the major threat. When our world is heating up, the oceans are rising, droughts are increasing, and life for all of us, especially developing countries, will be much more difficult. So Addis, the next 3 days, is identifying how are we going to finance all of this? Financing for development. Invest for tomorrow's planet and people. That's the motto for the Addis conference. Invest for tomorrow, because tomorrow's world is going to be a very difficult one, a different one from today's. And one of the major financing sources that they're identifying now, which is critical to this project, this global project, is domestic finance. And that's very interesting for a country like Afghanistan, which is still so highly dependent on international aid. No longer is it only about aid, which is still going to be important. We must ensure that donors continue to provide support to the developing countries who need it. No longer is it only trade, because international trade is probably the best way to ensure that the lives of people are protected and improved. But it's also domestic revenue, tax collection. And I think this is very consistent with President Ghani's emphasis on national ownership and national responsibility. And that's something moving forward is UNDP. That's what we are about. We are here to help support the government in developing the administrative capabilities, both at the national level and the local level, on how it can develop this domestic source of revenue to prevent climate change from having a really negative impact on this country in about 15 to 20 years.
Thank you very much. Mr. Douglas will be the representative of Afghanistan for this conference, because you have the leadership and you're moderating the UNDP in Afghanistan. Can you lobby for Afghanistan in this conference as well, and to convince more donors to finance many projects in Afghanistan? Can you lobby for Afghanistan in this conference as well?
Well, I mean, it's starting today, but UNDP is a lead advocate and a lead organizer in the conference in Addis. And obviously, as Afghanistan is the biggest country office for UNDP in the world, its interests will be duly reflected and promoted in Addis. And it's a key link also, because the primary defining threat immediately right now, which has acted as such a detriment to the development process here, is of course the security situation. And in Addis, this is one of the key requirements that will also be discussed in September, because again, this conference is about financing. In September, in a few months, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, will be adopted by the world community. And one of the key linkages that will be discussed in Addis, and as well as in New York, when the SDGs are agreed upon, is the link between security and development. And again, that's why it's so important that the security situation here improve. And it is our hope that, you know, while UNDP doesn't have a direct role in the peace negotiations, we do have some projects that are supporting the government in terms of helping to bring about peace, or to help get the most mileage out of peace once it is agreed upon by the warring sides.
Okay, let me have one question more in this part, that does the UNDP come over to the MDG projects? Because in the coming conference, we're opening a new section, which is SDG, and it's a globalized program for all the world. My question is, does the UNDP come over, and do you have any significant result from the previous one, the MDG project, or not?
Yeah. So in terms of some of the new projects that we are developing right now in consultation with the government, one of them clearly is on bringing about greater mitigation and adaptation to the world, the threat of climate change. How can we help for example, one big problem faced here in Afghanistan is the lack of sustainable and accessible energy, electricity, for many people, especially in the rural areas. So we're about to launch a project now to help those communities access clean energy. And that means no longer burning wood in a small hut, which is very unhealthy for the people themselves, but accessing renewable and clean sources of energy. This is one of our top priorities moving forward. But it's not only enough to help the people in this way. Already we're seeing an increase in the threat of natural disasters. This is something that's going to affect, unfortunately, many of the developing countries today. When the real threat and damage of climate change starts to be felt in about 15, 20 years, there will be more natural disasters, more landslides, more drought in many of these countries, and I expect Afghanistan will be experiencing increasingly more drought. So we need to help already the government to prepare for this. We need to help the people of Afghanistan to prepare for this. And these are what we call adaptation measures. The country of Afghanistan must begin to adapt to the threat and damage of climate change, which will unfortunately happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. ادامه این گفتگو تا لحظات بعد. دوباره خوش آمدید. Mr. Douglas, let me have your vision regarding the development process in Afghanistan. Don't you think it's a correct time for UNDP and other donors to finance the sustainable project for Afghanistan?
Well, I think you used a very important word, sustainable. And that I could not agree more, that as we move forward in the partnership between the government of Afghanistan and UNDP, it's all about how we can achieve this sustainability, which is kind of the gold standard. It's the ultimate objective in everything that we do worldwide. And what that means is that it's not that we are here and providing support year after year after year on the same areas of need, one year after the other after the next. It means that our role is really just, how shall I explain it? It's like getting the ball to start rolling on its own. That's what we can do with some of the financing that we can mobilize from the donors, through the technical knowledge that we can bring on what has worked in development before. But then, soon, and I talked about balance earlier, if all the pieces are in place, the people want it and need it, the government can provide the leadership and the framework and the policies on how people can improve their lives. Then that ball should roll entirely by itself, and UNDP should no longer be in the picture.
So you mean that's the correct time for a sustainable project in Afghanistan?
That's the way it's supposed to work.
Okay, okay. UNDP as a biggest funder for IC and Election Commission in Afghanistan. One of the question is that the people of Afghanistan and also the authorities and the officials guess and feel this one, that the UNDP decreased, even stopped financing and also supporting the IC. And you have some precondition. Let me know about the precondition of UNDP for supporting the electoral commissions.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's not that UNDP stopped payments on financing. I'm very sad to hear that there is that misperception out there. UNDP doesn't work that way. UNDP depends on contributions from the international community and with its technical support on how that financing can be used to support democratic and transparent and fair elections. That's what we can provide. But once the donors say there's not an election planned, so we are no longer going to be providing that support, we must accept their decision.
So it's not your precondition. It's
not
the
our
donor's precondition.
It's the donors that we rely on for their support.
And you accept this
And
one, that the
UNDP
donor have with a precondition.
I won't say preconditions. The one condition is a very obvious one. There has to be an election. Until there's an election decided upon, and when, how can we realistically expect the donors to continue to provide election support when there's no election? In fact, UNDP in Afghanistan, on this one project, was probably the only election project that we support in the world today, where we were providing support over such a long time, and the donors were providing support for such a long time, in the absence of a clear timetable for an election. So I'm very, I want to make that clear for your audience, that the donors have good reason to say, look, we need to see an election timetable in place before we continue with the support. And this came as a bit of a surprise to UNDP itself. But I also want to emphasize that every dollar that we have brought to the election support area has been agreed upon with the government. And every dollar with the IEC, for example, that we have spent has been agreed upon, planned, and budgeted very carefully. So I was also very sad to hear that even some of my own staff members were threatened, and they're very concerned about their safety. I'm very concerned about their safety, because there's been an image that for some reason, that UNDP itself decided to stop these payments. It could not be further from the truth.
It's not the decision of UNDP at all.
We can't work unless we have funding.
Okay. Although the donors have some essential point as a precondition, for example, the government of Afghanistan should announce the timetable for upcoming election. For example, they must have a plan and a strategy. What was the response of government for you regarding the
Well, I
financing
understand the government
the
right
election?
now is deeply in the process of deciding when the elections take place. So I can assure you that the donor community, as well as UNDP, we're very much looking forward to that announcement. Because as soon as that announcement is made, we will come together and see how we can support this government in holding fair, transparent, and democratic elections.
Okay, one thing more. In a reaction regarding the UNDP decision for decreasing, even stopping the access for electoral commission, the official in IEC mentioned that the UNDP is not in the position to take decision for decreasing or increasing the access, because UNDP is like a channel and a bridge between us and 22 countries which they have already committed for helping the electoral system of Afghanistan. What is your response for the IEC?
Well, again, this is something that we're looking into right now, because I'm very concerned that this message has somehow gotten out into the public, putting at risk my staff. And if it were accurate or true, I could understand that. But the fact that it's so far from the truth, that it's not UNDP that's deciding to hold back payments for contractors in this country, it's just not accurate. So I don't know how this message got into the public. I'm not saying who said it. I don't know who has promoted this view.
The spokesperson for IEC.
And that is something that we will have to discuss with IEC, because again, IEC is a very key partner of ours. We work very closely with the IEC. So this was very surprising to me. If it's accurate, it would be very surprising. So, because IEC also knows that we don't work like that. Okay. So again, I have not yet met our partners in IEC. I do know that over many years, we have developed a very close partnership with IEC. We have successfully supported the government and the IEC in holding the last few elections, and I am sure we will continue to support them in the next election.
Mr. Douglas, I'm sorry, I'm just transferring the speech of the one of the top-ranking official of the IEC and also the spokesperson for IEC. Let's come here. If it's accurate, that they mentioned UNDP is not in the position to take decision toward the financing the electoral system for Afghanistan, what will be your position? What will be your response?
My position is UNDP goes to great lengths to ensure that every dollar of support that we bring to this country on behalf of the donor community is used in a transparent and proper manner. That is our top priority.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas. We mentioned that UNDP elect project will be clear when the deadline for upcoming election is determined by the official and by the president of Afghanistan. Recently, President Ghani mentioned in a declaration that we clear the deadline for parliamentary election within 1 month. So if the President Ghani announced the deadline, the timetable, and also the deadline for the election, does the UNTP have the preparation for financing and supporting the Electoral Commission?
Well, it'll take some time because, you know, when the donor funding stopped in April very suddenly, we had to let go many of our people and our support to many parts of the government, to the IEC itself, ended. That was not our choice, but I think it was an understandable decision by the donors. So that means once the timetable is announced by the president and the government, it'll take a bit of time for us to mobilize and to hire the people back to get ready. But again, I think the fact that we've been doing this for so many years and the donor community is genuinely interested in supporting these elections. At least we have the support. It just might take a little bit more time to get prepared.
Okay. Mr. Douglas, could you please tell me about the time, the length of this time, how much it will be?
Well, this also depends on the role that the government of Afghanistan wants the UNDP to play in the elections. And you see, there's kind of the deluxe version, the moderate version, and the bare bones version, the very economic version. So it depends on how the government wants to use the international community in supporting these elections. So I think it's a bit premature to, for me to start talking about timetables, because a lot will depend on the expectations of the government on the UN.
Mr. Douglas, the donors have already committed for helping the election in Afghanistan, right? And also UNDP as a channel and facilitator. And also you have the partnership with the government of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
If the timetable announced by the government, it means that you take much time to get prepared for financing the election. You mean like this?
It will take some time. I think, again,
Can
right
you
now,
clear the time?
our project staff in supporting the elections is at a very, very, very small number right now. To support a nationwide election properly, we will need to mobilize the right technical support, people with experience in supporting elections. We will make sure, we will need to procure equipment, ballots, things like that. So that all takes time, but I don't think it's anything that's unusual. Elections take time to manage.
You cannot mention definitely 1 month, 2 months, 3 months.
No, it's too early. We are waiting for the government to tell us what it expects. You see, this is another priority of the president. This should not be supply-driven, what we want to do in your country. This must be led by the government of Afghanistan. Their needs and expectations and priorities must be made clear, and UNDP is very much committed to this arrangement. We cannot say what we think we want to do or what we should be doing. The lead must be the government.
Okay. For financing the upcoming election, your plan is ambiguous, and it's not.
At this point, it's ambiguous.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the bullet mission of UNDP here in Afghanistan is reintegration and reconciliation.
But let me just add on one point, though. We are currently developing a project concept so that we will be as ready as possible as soon as the government announces the elections. So we're already getting things ready. And I think just to minimize, because we don't want to lose time once those elections are announced. So already there's works and preparations underway.
Thank you very much. Mr. Douglas, one of the bullet mission of UNDP in Afghanistan is the reintegration and reconciliation process in Afghanistan. Yeah. Are you involved the recent and the last peace talk in Islamabad, or it's something out of UNDP mandate?
It's beyond our mandate. We were not involved.
You're not involved?
No.
And what's your part for reconciliation and reintegration in Afghanistan?
Well, I think one of the entry points for UNDP to be of help is consistent with what we've been doing in this country for a number of years. And that is preparing communities for when former combatants want to give up war and begin a life of peace. And that's what UNDP does. We work with communities and local authorities and local governments to ensure that those rural communities from which many of these combatants come from are ready to bring them back into gainful employment, to good jobs, so that they can have a good life in peace as well. And that's what we will continue to be doing, I hope.
You mean that you are persuading the peoples and the community authorities, local authorities, for going to the peace negotiation. One thing more, does the UNDP have the part for political section of the peace negotiation in Afghanistan?
No, UNDP doesn't, but UNDP is involved in this initiative, which I was just mentioning. Our focus is on the community level. But another part of that is supporting the High Peace Council. Okay? And that is something that the donor community itself and several governments are providing direct support to. But we're linked together because not only support at the high political level, which we are not involved in, the international community and other bilateral partners are involved in that, but it also, the ground must be cultivated in order to build the peace from the ground up as well. And that's where we come in.
As you know about the environment in Afghanistan, condition and development process in Afghanistan, what do you think? How many years more Afghanistan needs for international community assist?
Again, the sooner that we can help build the capacity at the government level, at the community level, to lead the development process, the sooner we should leave. UNDP and the UN system and international aid generally should never be provided longer than is needed. The people of Afghanistan don't want that. The government of Afghanistan doesn't want that. It's a proud people here, and people want to be independent. People want to be self-sustaining, and we want to help them to be that.
Okay, but can you say how many years more we need for such assist?
I can, as few as possible.
As few as possible. Thank you very much for coming to this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. و سپاسگزارم از شما که این گفتگو رو دنبال کردین. تا دیدار و فرصت دیگر، خدا نگهدار.